The stagecoach rattled into Deadwood, Dakota territory in late September of 1876, with a woman aboard who looked like she had swallowed all the bitterness the world had to offer and was choking on it still. Her name was Kate Monroe, though she went by Kate, and at 24 years old she had already buried 2 husbands under circumstances that would make any woman suspicious of the entire male population. The first had been a gambler who married her for her father's money and disappeared the night after the wedding with every cent she possessed. The second had been a shopkeeper in Cheyenne who promised her security and a home, only for her to discover he already had a wife and 3 children in St. Louis. When that wife showed up with a shotgun and the law, Kate found herself once again alone, this time with a reputation she did not deserve and a heart that felt like it had been trampled by a herd of wild mustangs. She stepped down from the coach onto the muddy street, her brown traveling dress dusty and her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that did nothing to soften the hard set of her jaw. She had come to Deadwood because her Aunt Miriam owned a boarding house here, and it was the only place left in the world where someone might take her in without judgment. The town itself was a chaotic sprawl of tents and hastily constructed buildings, all thrown together in the mad rush for gold that had brought thousands of prospectors to these Black Hills. The street teemed with miners, gamblers, and women of questionable reputation, all shouting and pushing through the September mud. Kate retrieved her single trunk and asked a passing merchant where she might find the Miriam's boarding house. He pointed up the hill toward a 2-story structure that looked only slightly more permanent than its neighbors. She hired a boy with a wheelbarrow to transport her trunk and made her way up the steep street, her boots sinking into the muck with each step. The boarding house was cleaner than she expected, with whitewashed walls and curtains in the windows. Her Aunt Miriam answered the door, a stout woman of 50 with kind eyes and flour on her apron. The embrace she pulled Kate into was warm and smelled of bread and cinnamon, and for the first time in months, Kate felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. "You look half dead, child," Miriam said, pulling back to examine her niece's face. Come in, come in. I have a room ready for you, and supper will be on the table in an hour." Kate followed her aunt inside, where the boarding house revealed itself to be surprisingly comfortable despite the rough surroundings. The walls were decorated with simple paintings and cross-stitch samplers, and the furniture, though worn, was sturdy and well-maintained. Miriam led her upstairs to a small room with a window overlooking the street. It was spare but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk at the foot of the bed. "I cannot pay you much," Kate said quietly. "I have almost nothing left." "Nonsense," Miriam said briskly. "You will help me with the cooking and cleaning, and we will call it even. I have 8 boarders right now, all miners, and they eat like they have never seen food before. An extra pair of hands will be most welcome." That evening, Kate met the boarders at supper. They were a rough lot, as she expected, men with calloused hands and sunburned faces who barely looked up from their plates long enough to grunt a greeting. All except one. He sat at the far end of the table, a man perhaps 26 or 27 with dark blonde hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that seemed to take in everything without making a show of it. He wore a faded blue shirt and had the lean, weathered look of someone who spent his days outdoors. When Miriam introduced Kate as her niece, he nodded politely and said, "Welcome to Deadwood, Miss Monroe. I hope it treats you better than it has most folks." His name was James Thornton, and he was not a miner like the others. He worked breaking horses for the freight companies, and occasionally hired himself out as a guide for newcomers who needed someone to show them the territory. He had arrived in Deadwood 6 months earlier from Montana and had a reputation, Miriam told Kate later, for being honest to a fault and reliable as the sunrise. Kate did not pay much attention to him at first. She had learned to keep her distance from men, to watch them with the wariness of someone who had been burned too many times. She focused instead on her work, rising early to help Miriam prepare breakfast, spending her days washing linens and scrubbing floors, serving supper, and then cleaning up afterward. It was hard work, but it kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, which was exactly what she needed. But James Thornton had a way of being present without being intrusive. He always thanked her quietly when she served his meals. He held doors without making a production of it. When one of the other boarders made a crude joke at Kate's expense, James shut it down with a look that could freeze water. He never tried to engage her in conversation beyond the necessities, but she found herself noticing him anyway, the way he moved with an easy grace, the way he listened when people spoke, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when something genuinely amused him. 3 weeks after Kate's arrival, an early autumn storm rolled through Deadwood, bringing with it rain that turned the streets into rivers of mud and a cold wind that stripped the last leaves from the cottonwoods along Whitewood Creek. The boarding house leaked in 2 places, and Kate spent the afternoon positioning buckets and pans to catch the drips. When James came in that evening, soaked to the skin and shivering, Miriam immediately ordered him to change into dry clothes before he caught his death. He reappeared 20 minutes later in clean clothes, his hair still damp, and found Kate in the kitchen preparing vegetables for supper. He picked up a knife without asking and began helping her chop onions. "You do not have to do that," Kate said, surprised. "I know," he replied. "But it makes the work go faster, and I imagine you have been on your feet all day." They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic chopping and the rain beating against the windows. Finally, James said, "You always look like you are waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like you are braced for something bad to happen." Kate's hand stilled on the knife. She did not look at him. "Maybe because something bad usually does happen. That is a hard way to live. It is the only way I know anymore." James set down his knife and turned to face her. "I heard some talk in town about your situation, about the men who wronged you." Kate felt her face flush with anger and shame. "People should mind their own business." "They should," he agreed, "but they do not. I am not telling you this to embarrass you. I am telling you because I want you to know that I do not put stock in gossip, and I do not judge people based on circumstances that were not their fault." She finally looked at him, searching his face for signs of pity or worse, the kind of knowing smirk that some men wore when they thought a woman was available because she had been unlucky in love. She found neither. His expression was serious but kind, and his gray eyes were steady. "Why do you care?" she asked, and she hated how her voice shook slightly. "Because I have been watching you run yourself ragged trying to prove something to people who are not paying attention anyway," he said. "And because I think you deserve better than what you have gotten so far." Kate turned back to the onions, her vision blurring. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of this man who was being far too decent for her to know how to handle. "You do not know anything about me. I know you are kind to your aunt even when you are exhausted. I know you do not complain even though this work is hard. I know you read books when you think no one is watching, which means you have not given up on finding something beautiful in the world. And I know that whoever those men were who hurt you, they were fools." The knife slipped in Kate's hand, and she gasped as the blade nicked her finger. Blood welled up immediately, bright red against her pale skin. Before she could react, James had pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and wrapped it around her finger, applying gentle pressure. "Hold that," he instructed, and then he went to the pump to wet a clean cloth. He returned and carefully unwrapped the handkerchief, cleaning the cut with surprising gentleness for someone with such work-roughened hands. The cut was not deep, and the bleeding had already slowed. He tore a strip from the cloth and bound her finger securely. "Thank you," Kate managed. "You are welcome." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Then Miriam bustled into the kitchen, and the moment broke. Over the following weeks, Kate found herself drawn into James's orbit despite her best efforts to maintain her distance. He had a way of showing up when she needed help with something heavy or when one of the other boarders became too familiar. He brought her books from the lending library, always with a casual, "I thought you might like this," never making it seem like charity. He told her stories about the horses he worked with, about the vast open country of Montana where he had grown up, about his parents who had died of fever when he was 19 and left him to make his own way in the world. She found herself telling him things in return, small things at first. About growing up in Ohio, about her father who had been a banker and died when she was 20, leaving her alone and vulnerable to the first man who showed her attention. She did not talk about her husbands yet, but James did not push. He simply listened, and his presence became something she looked forward to rather than something she guarded against. In mid-October, the first snow dusted the peaks above Deadwood, and the air took on a sharp clarity that made everything seem more vivid. James invited Kate to accompany him on a ride to see the changing aspens in the hills above town. She hesitated, old fears rising up, but Miriam encouraged her to go. "He is a good man, Kate," her aunt said firmly, "and you cannot hide in this house forever." So Kate borrowed a split skirt from Miriam and met James at the livery stable early on a Sunday morning. He had brought 2 horses, a steady bay mare for her and a rangy buckskin gelding for himself. They rode out of town as the sun was rising, painting the hills gold and crimson. The aspens were at their peak, brilliant yellow against the dark pines, and the air smelled of pine resin and the first hint of winter. James led her along a trail that climbed steadily, offering views of Deadwood spread out below and the surrounding black hills rolling away in all directions. They stopped beside a small creek to rest the horses, and James unpacked a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples that he had cadged from Miriam's kitchen. They sat on a sun-warmed rock beside the water, eating in companionable silence. A jay scolded them from a nearby tree, and the creek burbled over smooth stones. Kate felt something inside her relax, a tension she had been carrying for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "This is beautiful," she said finally. "Thank you for bringing me here." "I hoped you would like it," James said. He turned to look at her, and his expression was more serious than usual. "Kate, I want to ask you something, but I do not want to upset you." She tensed immediately. "What is it? What would it take for you to trust someone again?" "Not me necessarily, but anyone. What would that person have to do to prove they were worthy of your faith?" Kate stared at the water, watching it flow around the rocks, always moving, always changing. "I do not know if I can trust anyone again," she said quietly. "Every man I have ever relied on has betrayed me. My father died and left me alone. My first husband married me for money and abandoned me. My second husband lied about everything he was. How am I supposed to believe that the next one will be any different?" "You are not," James said. "Believing is not something you can force, but maybe you can watch. Maybe you can pay attention to whether someone's actions match their words. Maybe you can give them time to prove themselves before you decide one way or the other. And what if they just wait longer to betray me? What if they are more patient about it?" James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Then you will deal with it when it happens. But Kate, if you never let anyone close enough to hurt you, you also never let anyone close enough to help you, to care about you, to love you. That is not living, that is just surviving." Kate felt tears sting her eyes. "Surviving is all I have left." "No, it is not." James reached over and gently took her hand, the one that still had the bandage on the finger she had cut. "You have more than that. You have a good mind and a kind heart that has not given up despite everything. You have your aunt who loves you. You have the chance to build a new life here. And you have at least one person who thinks you are remarkable and would very much like the opportunity to prove that not all men are liars." Kate looked at him, really looked at him, and saw no deception in his face. She saw hope and patience and something that might be the beginning of love if she let it be. "I have been betrayed by every man I have ever trusted," she whispered. "How can I trust you?" James squeezed her hand gently. "I will be your first truth," he said. "I will show you every day that I am who I say I am." I will not make promises I cannot keep. I will not ask you for more than you can give. And if you decide in the end that you cannot take the risk, I will accept that and step back. But I am asking you to give me the chance to prove myself." Something in Kate's chest, the hard knot of pain and mistrust that had been there for so long, began to loosen. She did not trust him yet, not completely, but she wanted to. That desire was new, fragile, terrifying, and she held it carefully like a flame that might blow out at any moment. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "Neither do I," James admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together." They rode back to Deadwood as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Kate felt as though something fundamental had shifted, as though she had taken a step toward something unknown but possibly, impossibly, good. Over the next weeks, James kept his word. He did not push her for more than she could give. He did not make grand declarations or sweep her into some dramatic romance. Instead, he simply showed up, day after day, steady and reliable as stone. He fixed the broken step on the back porch without being asked. He carried water when the pump froze. He sat with Miriam when she was feeling poorly and kept her entertained with stories until she felt better. He treated Kate with a careful respect that never crossed into distance, always letting her set the pace, always patient. November brought cold weather and snow that turned Deadwood into a white wonderland that was beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. The boarding house became a cozy refuge, and Kate found herself looking forward to the evenings when James would sit by the fire and read aloud to whoever wanted to listen. His voice was deep and pleasant, and he had a gift for bringing stories to life. She would sit with her mending and listen, and sometimes she would look up to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. One evening in late November, after the other boarders had gone to bed, Kate and James sat together by the dying fire. Miriam had retired hours ago, and the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling timbers and the wind outside the windows. "Tell me about your first husband," James said quietly. Kate stiffened. She had known this conversation would come eventually, but that did not make it easier. "Why? Because it is part of who you are, and I want to know you." She stared at the embers for a long time, gathering her courage. Finally, she began to speak. "His name was Thomas Webb. He was charming and handsome, and he paid attention to me at a time when I felt invisible. My father had just died, and I was grieving and alone. Thomas said all the right things. He promised me a home and a family and security. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I was scared of being alone." She paused, swallowing hard. "We married quickly, too quickly. The night after the wedding, I woke up to find him gone. He had taken every bit of money my father had left me, every piece of jewelry, everything of value. He left a note that said he was sorry, but he needed the money more than he needed a wife. I never saw him again." James's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just waited for her to continue. "The second husband, Robert, I met in Cheyenne. I had been working as a seamstress, barely making enough to survive. He owned a general store and seemed steady and respectable. He courted me properly, or so I thought. We married, and for 3 months I thought I had finally found someone decent. Then his real wife showed up." Her voice broke slightly. She had hired a detective to find him. He had abandoned her and their children 2 years earlier, taking their savings and leaving them destitute. When she found him, she brought the law with her. Robert was arrested for bigamy and theft. I was questioned for hours, and even though they eventually accepted that I had not known about his other family, the damage was done. Everyone looked at me like I was either a fool or complicit. I could not stay in Cheyenne after that. James reached over and took her hand. "Those men were criminals, Kate. What they did to you was not your fault." "I know that in my head," Kate said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "But in my heart, I keep wondering what I did wrong. How did I not see what they were? Why did I trust them so easily?" "Because you were young and alone and wanted to believe the world had some kindness in it," James said firmly. "That is not a character flaw, that is human." And the fact that you still have the capacity to hope, even after all that, tells me you are stronger than you think." Kate looked at him through her tears. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much?" James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who has survived things that would have broken most people. I see someone brave and kind and determined not to let the world make her bitter. And because somewhere along the way I fell in love with you, and I cannot seem to stop myself from wanting to give you all the good things you should have had from the beginning." Kate's breath caught. "You love me." "I do," James said simply. "I know it is too soon, and I know you are not ready to hear it, let alone say it back. But I have never been good at hiding what I feel, and I do not want to start now. I love you, Kate Monroe, and I am willing to wait as long as it takes for you to believe it." Kate stood abruptly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She paced to the window and back, her mind whirling. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment and pain. But another part, a part that was growing stronger every day, wanted to stay, wanted to believe, wanted to take the terrifying leap of trusting someone again. She turned to face James, who had stood but made no move to approach her. "I am afraid," she said. "I am so afraid of being hurt again." "I know," James said, "and I cannot promise you that I will never make mistakes or disappoint you in some way, because I am human and humans are imperfect. But I can promise you that I will never lie to you. I will never betray your trust. I will never use you or leave you or make you feel like you are anything less than precious to me. That is my word, and my word is all I have to give you right now." Kate crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss or a tentative one. It was fierce and desperate and full of all the hope and fear and longing she had been holding back for so long. James responded immediately, his arms coming around her, holding her close but not too tight, giving her the space to pull away if she needed to. But she did not pull away. She leaned into him, into his warmth and his strength and his steady, unshakable presence. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I will be your first truth," he whispered again. "Every day for the rest of my life if you will let me." "I want to believe you," Kate whispered back. "I am choosing to believe you. That is all I ask." The winter that followed was hard, as winters in the Black Hills tended to be, but Kate barely noticed the cold. She was too busy discovering what it meant to be with someone who kept his promises. James courted her properly, with the full knowledge and approval of Miriam, who watched them with the satisfied smile of someone who had suspected this outcome from the beginning. He took her sledding on the hills above town, and they tumbled into snowdrifts laughing like children. He taught her to ice skate on the frozen creek, catching her every time she stumbled. He brought her small gifts, nothing expensive but always thoughtful. A book of poetry, a pair of warm gloves, a carved wooden bird that fit in the palm of her hand. He talked to her about everything and nothing, sharing his dreams of someday owning his own ranch, asking about her hopes and fears, making plans for a future that included both of them. And slowly, carefully, Kate allowed herself to believe in that future. She noticed how James never promised something he could not deliver. She noticed how he treated everyone with the same respect and honesty, from Miriam to the youngest stable boy. She noticed how other men in town spoke of him with genuine respect, how women trusted him to be alone with their daughters without fear, how even the roughest miners deferred to his judgment in disputes. She watched him through the harsh Dakota winter, and everything he showed her was consistent with everything he said. In February, as a blizzard raged outside and kept everyone confined to the boarding house for 3 days, James asked Kate to marry him. They were in the kitchen, of all places, where Kate was making bread and James was supposedly helping, but mostly just stealing bits of dough to eat raw. "I know we have only been courting for a few months," he said, leaning against the counter and watching her knead the dough with flour-dusted hands. "And I know you have reasons to want to take this slow, but Kate, I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you." I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to raise children with you and grow old with you and argue about silly things and make up afterward. I want all of it, every bit of a life together." Kate's hands stilled in the dough. Her heart was racing again, but this time it was not fear that made it pound. It was hope, bright and fierce and terrifying in its intensity. "What if I am still afraid sometimes?" she asked. "Then I will hold you until the fear passes," James said. "Kate, I am not asking you to be perfect. I am not asking you to never doubt or worry. I am just asking you to take a chance on us, on me. On the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this time it will work out." She looked at him, this man who had been so patient, so kind, so relentlessly honest. She thought about the months they had spent together, about all the small moments that had built into something strong and real. She thought about the future he was offering, a future that terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady. "Yes, I will marry you." James crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, heedless of the flour that now covered them both. He kissed her thoroughly, and when he pulled back, he was grinning like a fool. "You will not regret this," he promised. "You better make sure I do not," Kate said. But she was smiling too, wider than she had smiled in years. They married in March of 1877 in a simple ceremony at the small church that had been built in Deadwood over the winter. Miriam cried happy tears and insisted on hosting a reception at the boarding house. Half the town showed up, it seemed, bringing food and gifts and good wishes. Kate wore a dress of soft blue wool that Miriam had helped her sew, and James wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Kate's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. When the preacher asked if she took this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, Kate looked into James's gray eyes and said, "I do," with a conviction that surprised even herself. And when James said the same words back to her, she believed him with every fiber of her being. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a 2-room cabin that James had been renting and slowly fixing up in anticipation of this day. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Kate set about making it a home with a fierce determination. She sewed curtains for the windows and braided rugs for the floors. James built her a bookshelf and a proper kitchen table. They planted a garden as soon as the ground thawed, and Kate spent her evenings planning what vegetables they would grow. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment, as they always are. Kate had moments of panic, old fears rising up to choke her when James was late coming home or when he was quiet, and she could not read his mood. But James was always patient, always willing to talk through her fears, always ready to reassure her without making her feel foolish. And gradually, so gradually that Kate barely noticed it happening, the fear began to fade. It did not disappear entirely. She suspected it never would completely, but it receded into the background, no longer the defining feature of her life. In its place grew trust, solid and real and earned through 1,000 small moments of James proving himself to be exactly who he said he was. In May, James came home with news that set their life on a new course. A rancher to the north was selling out and moving back east, and his property was available for a price that James thought they could manage if they saved carefully for another year. It was not a large spread, just 160 acres with a small house and barn, but it had good water and grazing land, and everything they would need to start raising horses. "It is everything I have dreamed of," James said, his eyes bright with excitement. "But only if you want it too. I will not make decisions about our future without you." Kate thought about it carefully. She had come to love Deadwood despite its rough edges, and she would miss Miriam terribly. But the idea of having land of their own, of building something permanent and lasting, appealed to her deeply. And more than that, she wanted to give James his dream, this man who had given her so much. "Let us do it," she said. "Let us build something together." They spent the next year working and saving every penny they could. Kate took in sewing and laundry to supplement James's income from breaking horses. They lived frugally, eating simple meals and making do with what they had. It was hard work, but they did it together, and Kate found a satisfaction in it that she had never experienced before. They were building toward something, working for a shared goal, and every small sacrifice brought them closer to their dream. In June of 1878, they bought the ranch. The property was called the Running Creek Ranch, named for the stream that ran along the southern boundary, and when Kate saw it for the first time, she fell in love. The house was small but sturdy, built of logs with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over rolling grassland. The barn needed work, but James assured her he could repair it. The land itself was beautiful, with the creek lined by cottonwoods and the grass already greening up with the spring rains. They moved in on a bright June day, their few possessions loaded into a wagon borrowed from a friend. Miriam came to help them settle in, and she cried again as she hugged them both goodbye. "You have found your place," she told Kate, "and you have found your person. That is all anyone can ask for in this life." Kate held her aunt tight, grateful beyond words for the refuge she had provided when Kate needed it most. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The first year on the ranch was challenging in ways Kate had not anticipated. There was so much to learn, so much work to be done. They repaired fences and cleared land, and started a small herd of horses that James planned to break and sell. Kate learned to manage a garden on a much larger scale than her little plot in Deadwood, preserving vegetables for the winter and tending to chickens and the milk cow they acquired. She learned to ride properly, spending hours in the saddle as James taught her how to work with the horses, but it was also the happiest year of Kate's life. She and James worked side by side every day, and in the evenings they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over their land. They talked about everything and nothing, making plans and dreaming dreams and simply enjoying each other's company. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, how to work together efficiently, and how to give each other space when needed. And at night, in the privacy of their small bedroom, they learned each other in other ways with a tenderness and passion that left Kate breathless. She had never experienced intimacy like this, built on trust and genuine affection rather than duty or deception. With James, she felt safe enough to be vulnerable, to let down all her guards and simply be herself. And every time he held her afterward, whispering how much he loved her, how precious she was to him, another piece of the old pain healed. In the spring of 1879, Kate realized she was pregnant. She told James one evening as they sat together watching a mare and her new foal play in the pasture. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy and awe, and a fierce protectiveness that made her eyes sting with happy tears. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as though he could not quite believe it. "Kate, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," James said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me everything I ever wanted and more. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Kate bloomed with it, her body growing round and her face glowing with health. James was attentive to the point of being comical, constantly worrying about whether she was overdoing it, whether she was eating enough, whether she was comfortable. Kate tolerated his hovering with good-natured patience, secretly touched by how much he cared. In November of 1879, on a cold, clear night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Kate gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from the nearest town, and with James pacing anxiously outside until the midwife finally allowed him in to meet his child. When he saw Kate holding their baby, both of them tired but well, he dropped to his knees beside the bed and wept. They named him Samuel, after James's father, and he was a healthy, strong baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. James was a devoted father from the first moment, spending hours just watching Samuel sleep, helping with the middle-of-the-night feedings, changing nappies without complaint. Kate watched him with their son and felt her heart expand with a love so profound it almost hurt. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered as James's reputation for breaking quality horses spread throughout the territory. They added onto the house, building a proper second floor with bedrooms for their growing family. In 1881, Kate gave birth to twin daughters, Emily and Grace, who filled the house with laughter and chaos. 2 years later came another son, Jacob, completing their family. Kate thrived as a mother and a rancher's wife. She was active in the small community that had grown up around them, helping organize a school and serving as a midwife herself once she had gained experience. She never forgot where she had come from, and she went out of her way to help other women who found themselves alone or in difficult circumstances, offering them work or shelter or simply a listening ear. James kept every promise he had ever made to her. He was honest and faithful and hardworking, providing for his family and treating Kate with a respect and love that never wavered, even through the inevitable challenges that life brought. When the ranch struggled during a drought, they faced it together. When illness struck one of the children, they nursed the child back to health together. When they disagreed, which they did occasionally like any couple, they talked it through until they found a solution they could both live with. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James gave Kate a locket with a photograph of their family inside. On the back, he had engraved the words, "My first truth." When Kate saw it, she cried, remembering that night by the fire when he had made that promise to her. "You kept your word," she said, touching the locket. "Every single day you have been exactly who you said you would be." "It was not hard," James said softly. "All I had to do was love you, and that has been the easiest thing I have ever done." Kate thought about the woman she had been when she arrived in Deadwood all those years ago, bitter and broken and convinced that all men were liars. She thought about how James had patiently, persistently proven her wrong, not with grand gestures but with the steady accumulation of small acts of love and faithfulness. She thought about how he had taught her to trust again, to hope again, to believe that she deserved good things. "I love you," she said, and the words came easily now without fear or reservation. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes because I cannot imagine life without you anymore." "Then it is a good thing you will never have to," James said, pulling her close, "because I am not going anywhere. I am yours, Kate, for as long as I draw breath." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew into a quiet, thoughtful young man who shared his father's way with horses. The twins were as different as night and day, Emily bold and adventurous, Grace shy and artistic. Jacob was the baby, bright and charming and always getting into mischief. Kate watched her children grow up on the ranch and felt a deep satisfaction in the life she and James had built. Their children knew nothing of betrayal or broken promises. They had been raised in a home full of love and security, with parents who showed them through example what a good marriage looked like. Kate was determined that her children would never have to learn the hard lessons she had learned, that they would grow up believing in goodness and trust, because they had been surrounded by it. When Miriam passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1889, Kate grieved deeply for the aunt who had given her a second chance when she needed it most. James held her through the sadness, and together they made the journey to Deadwood for the funeral. The town had changed dramatically in the years since they had left, becoming more civilized and less wild, but Kate could still see traces of the rough mining camp it had been when she first arrived. Standing beside Miriam's grave, Kate reflected on how much her life had changed because of this place, because of the refuge her aunt had provided, because of the man she had met at a boarding house table all those years ago. She said a prayer of gratitude for Miriam, and for the path that had led her here, to this good life she had built from the ashes of her old one. As the children grew older and began to make their own way in the world, Kate and James found themselves entering a new phase of their life together. Samuel married a girl from town and took over more of the day-to-day running of the ranch. The twins both went east to school, Emily to study medicine and Grace to study art. Jacob announced his intention to become a lawyer and began reading law with a judge in Deadwood. Kate and James were proud of their children and the people they had become, but they also enjoyed having more time for just the two of them. They took long rides together like they had when they were courting. They read to each other in the evenings. They traveled to visit the children and then came home to their ranch, to the life they had built together over more than 20 years of marriage. On a summer evening in 1897, Kate and James sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They were both in their 40s now, with silver threading through their hair and lines on their faces earned through years of hard work and laughter and life. But the way James looked at Kate had not changed, and the way her heart still skipped when he smiled at her was the same as it had been 20 years earlier. "You ever think about how we met?" James asked, his hand finding hers on the bench between them. "Sometimes," Kate said. "I think about the woman I was then, and I almost cannot recognize her. She was so scared, so certain that nothing good could ever happen to her. And now." Kate looked out over the ranch at the home they had built together, at the life that spread out before them full of love and purpose and meaning. She thought about her children, successful and happy and making their own marks on the world. She thought about the respect she and James had earned in their community, the friends they had made, the challenges they had overcome together. "Now I know better," she said. "You taught me that not all men are liars. You showed me what trust looks like, what real love looks like. You were my first truth, James, and you have been my only truth every day since." James lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "And you have been mine," he said. "My truth, my home, my heart. Everything I am belongs to you, Kate. It always has. From that first moment, I saw you trying so hard to be brave when you were terrified inside." They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, holding hands and watching the night come on. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and one of the horses whinnied in response. The air smelled of grass and sage and the particular scent of the high plains in summer. Kate leaned her head on James's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, solid and warm and utterly dependable. She thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments both big and small that had woven their lives together into something strong and beautiful. She thought about the years still to come, about growing old together on this land they loved, about watching their grandchildren play in the yard someday, about continuing to build and grow and love until their days were done. She had arrived in Deadwood broken and bitter, convinced that all men were liars and that love was just another word for betrayal. But James Thornton had proven her wrong with the quiet persistence of his honesty and the steadfast constancy of his love. He had promised to be her first truth, and he had kept that promise every single day for more than 20 years. And as they sat together on their porch watching the stars come out over their ranch, Kate knew with absolute certainty that he would keep on keeping it for all the days they had left. That was the kind of man he was. That was the kind of love they had built, and that was the truth that had set her free.